That's amazing. Thank you very much. We've just been having fun for the past 20 years. And what is neat is that we've been doing it with so many other people. Because a farmer's life is often kind of solitary. And we decided fairly early on we didn't like solitary. We wanted to have a crowd around us. We like neighbors. We like friends. And so the real joy of what we've been doing is the community. And we'll get back to that as we go along a little further.
So we ought to really give a thank you to those farmers that helped us start when we were asking questions about organic farming. Because you know, there's some farmers in New York who had been farming organically almost 20 years before we did. And that was probably a lonely, hard road. When we look back, it's amazing how fast the organic industry has taken off, how fast things have changed. But it didn't always work that way. And I want to give a tribute to the people who helped us found NYCO, people like Tony Potenza, John Meyer, Jim Van Fleet. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch. But when we first started asking them about organic farming, they didn't have enough markets to sell everything that they were growing. And they did something that was really silly by the world standards, because they shared their markets with us, they shared their information with us, and they helped us get started. And they kind of taught us a new economic law, that the more you give away, the more you have, because within a short time of us getting started, there was more demand and more market than all of us together could fill, and there still is, and it's still ahead. And we need the next 1 million acres of organic transitioning in this country, and we won't even meet the demand if that 1 million acres transitions starting right now.
So we're going to continue with the talk, with the pictures and all, using the title that we have up here, because Klaus is a big picture kind of person. He sees the global kinds of consequences and issues and all. But I see myself as more of a little picture kind of person. And I think all of us who are little picture kind of people need to stand up and be proud of that. Because some people can change the big picture, but all of us can change the little picture. All of us can do for our communities, for our circles of friends, for the people that we impact, we can make a change there. You know, none of us are unempowered. It just depends on where we use our power. So see the big picture, and we're definitely going to talk about that, and then realize that each one of you has a small picture that we have to change. As Mary Rose said, we've been farming organically for about 20 years. We made our first organic harvest in 1993, and that was a real big risk. We were a young couple starting out. We had 2 small children. We were looking for a niche to fill. We just split up a partnership with Klaus's 2 brothers, and we'd gone out on our own with 500 acres of conventional corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay, and we realized about that time that that was not going to make us enough money in order to be productive, to be able to build our farm, buy new machinery, raise a family, and do the things we wanted to do. Klaus had grown up on a farm all of his life. His parents were refugees from World War II, from Germany, and so farming was part of his heritage. I'm one of these suburban kids that Mr. Ball was talking about. I grew up on Long Island, and some of you probably have too. I had not any farm background whatsoever. I just decided I wanted to be a farmer when I was 17, and everybody looked at me like I was crazy. It can be done. And so we came at it with my scientific background, Klaus's farming background, and decided that organic farming gave us the challenge, gave us the opportunities to do something different.
When we first started farming organically, the coffee shop was buzzing, and people were taking bets on when our auction would be set. They were, you know, they always thought I was a little bit crazy, but that confirmed it. And one of the criticisms that was thrown at us over and over is, you want to go back and set the clock back to 1930 and farm the way your grandparents did. And that is not at all what organic farming is about. And there was a lot of good old methods that we had passed down from earlier generations. And yes, organic farming uses those methods. But really what we're doing is going back in time to when agriculture was at a crossroads and there was a fork in the road. And I believe agriculture took a wrong turn. If we go back to the farming of the 30s, it was not sustainable. We had the Dust Bowl. We had families that were driven off their farms because they couldn't make a living. We had declining yields. We had soils that were being degraded. We had all these problems. The answer that agriculture took at that time, the solution, was to start using chemicals to solve the problems that the way we were farming had caused. And they were kind of Band-Aid chemicals.
So organic farming on our farm today looks more like this. We use the cutting-edge science that we learned from our associations, our collaboration with people at Cornell. We have installed solar panels on one of our new barns so that pretty much all of the stationary electricity used on our farm is solar. Our tractors are equipped with GPS mapping and precision seeding, precision equipment, so that we are doing the very best farming we possibly can. There's still plenty to learn. Our oldest son is going to be carrying us into the next 50 years with his knowledge and his enthusiasm. But organic farming isn't going back to the old ways. Organic farming is doing it so much better because we have to. We have to use the very best science there is, the very best understanding of the natural systems there is, using the best technology that's available, because technology is not just genetic engineering. It's a lot of things we can use, and doing the very best job of producing food that we can possibly do.
We had an unfair advantage, at least when we speak around the country. Almost everywhere we go, the other farmers are envious of us for living and working with Cornell University. And that's something I think all of the farmers here really need to thank the researchers at Cornell and the administration. When NYCO started, that's a group of farmers that's been meeting now for 20 years, we were allowed to use the facility to have our meetings free of charge. When we had agronomic questions, when something was going wrong in our fields, we had professors, researchers who were eager to come look and help us understand what was going on. The huge difference between organic farming and conventional farming is really not chemicals versus lack of chemicals or methods or anything like that. It is that we're farming proactively instead of reactively. That when we have a problem on our farm, we're asking what caused it. What did we do here over the past several seasons that created the situation that made this problem pop up, as opposed to what is the short-term management that I can do? What is the short-term practice that kills it? You know, when I learned how to farm the first 20 years, an awful lot of it was whenever there was something on our farm we didn't want, the question is always, how do I kill it? And usually the solution was something new that was more expensive than the one I had before.
So these are the folks that have made it all be fun for us. These are our three children, Peter, Elizabeth, and Daniel. Peter is now working with us. He's the one on that side. He's 26. Elizabeth is just graduated from Cornell in animal science, and right now she's serving in Peace Corps in Panama, working in agriculture and helping the indigenous populations there to maybe do a little bit better job. And Daniel, our youngest, is a freshman at Johnson & Wales University in baking and pastry. So one wants to go into crops, one wants to go into animals, and one wants to go into food. You know, that's kind of like us. And it's kind of been fun to see these children grow up. They've been very involved on the farm, and they've all had their FFA projects and been very enthusiastic about what we're doing. We feel very, very strongly that for children to grow up on a farm, they need to feel empowered to have their own enterprises, to have their own opportunities, to not just be free labor, but also to feel that the farm is not Dad's farm, it's not Mom's farm, it's not their farm, it's our farm. And I think that the fun for us has been farming with them, but I think that they've had a lot of fun also. Growing up as farm kids is an unusual role these days. There aren't a whole lot of farm kids out there anymore. And it's kind of been a nice thing that we've been able to experience with them.
We've been discussing and thinking about this problem of succession, especially since I guess we're above average too now.
Only you are.
And I'd like to throw out a challenge, and this is one in talking with friends across the country. Wanting to have our kids come home and take over the farm can be a loaded situation. When we were younger, how many of us wanted to go do what Dad was doing or go do what Mom was doing? We all wanted to go do our own thing. And I think we need to give our young people the chance to go do their own thing. And that's what we did with Peter that made him interested. He was farming his own land. He rented his own operation. He made his own decisions. Sometimes I disagreed with him, but I said, well, you're going to pay for it if you goofed. And I have to admit, sometimes he was right and I was wrong. I'd like to think I was right more of the times than he has been, but that's another argument.
He wouldn't agree.
But I think we really, us above average people, really need to make room for the new generation of organic farmers to go out and do their own thing and stretch their wings, try things that we didn't think of. I often quip that I'd like to be as young and as aggressive and ambitious as I was 30 or 40 years ago, but I wouldn't want to have to learn all that stuff all over again. Well, you young people you don't know the limits, and that's good. And you've got all that ambition and all that energy so that if you do make a mistake, you can pick up and take off from there. It's not that big a deal.
So we're going to move into a little philosophy here. About 10 years ago, we were at a PASA conference, and the keynote speaker was Dr. William Mcdonough. Now, Bill Mcdonough is an architect from the University of Virginia. He's written a bunch of books. And he got up in front of a bunch of organic farmers, and I think a lot of us wondered what in the world would an architect have to say to us. But what he had to say was talking more about design than about building buildings. And design is important for us to think about. That design is an indication of what we want our goals to be. If we want a better system, if we want a better process, we have to build that in at the beginning rather than try to clean up the mess at the end. He said we need to put filters in our minds rather than on the ends of pipes. Filter out the effluent before it becomes a pollution problem. Plan ahead. And don't try to just be okay with a less bad system. Let's imagine something truly better. And I think if we have anything to take away from this, here at NOFA New York and at other organic conferences that are going on this winter, we need to see that we can't come up with a less bad system. That's not good enough. We have to come up with an agricultural system that is truly something better, that truly addresses the problems and not tries to clean up the problems.
This world is headed towards some challenges, and we're in the middle of some. Climate change makes the news, but we've got dead zones out on the ends of our major agricultural rivers. We've got a world population that's going up that we need to feed at the population that it's going to be in the future. We need to really say slowing down the rate that we're polluting the water is not good enough. We have to stop polluting it. Slowing down the rate that we destroy soil is not going to feed the world in the future, but rebuilding the soil is going to rebuild the future. So I think William Mcdonough's words are really important here. A lot of our problems, we like to have big meetings and decide how can we reduce the rate at which the problem is getting worse. And that's falling far short of what we need to be doing.
Everybody has a definition of the term sustainability. I'm going to go back to several pieces from a class that I taught at Cornell earlier this year. It was a GMO issues class, so there was a lot of fun things going on there. In the research for that, I found that even BASF, which is a big chemical company, has a definition of sustainability. That is, yield is sustainability. In other things, I found this other definition, which is reasonably good, and that is not doing anything now that's going to put the next generation at a disadvantage. But our definition on our farm is a little bit different. And I think this is a very much more easy take-home lesson, that sustainability means treating others the way we want to be treated. Okay? Everybody kind of have heard that before? But let's expand it. We're not just talking about people. We're talking about our soil, our plants, our animals, our employees, our community, the whole package. If we were truly to look at that and say, how would we want to be treated in a situation like this? I think our decision making would be somewhat different, because we have to take responsibility for doing the right thing for everyone and everything around us.
Now, just throw out one line I remembered from William McDonough's talk that talked about sustainability that really stuck with me. He said, if it isn't fun, it's not sustainable. And we tend to leave that out of our big fancy definitions.
So, from this talk at Cornell, I put together this slide. We put together this slide because we thought that this was a kind of an interesting perspective. If you go to the coffee shop in an average small town farming community and you talk to any of the farmers about what's important on their farm, they'll say yield. And then they'll say yield. And then they'll say yield. They won't talk about any of the other factors that are part of the effect of pushing yield at all costs. They won't talk about the leakiness of the system, where fertilizers are going out of the system and then going into these dead zones. They won't talk about the effect on the communities or on other people, on other farmers. They won't talk about the effect on the nutritional quality of the food. They won't talk about any of the negative aspects. They'll take credit for the yield, but they won't take responsibility for the negative aspects.
When we look at long-term sustainability, we keep hearing about peak oil, but there are some other peak terms that we should be thinking about. How many of you have ever thought about peak phosphorus? Oh, more awareness in this room than most.
It's a coming problem.
This country has about 30 years worth of phosphorus reserves. China has the next biggest reserves, and 90% of the world's reserves are in Tunisia and Morocco, countries that really love us. And that's only one of the things that we're hitting peak. What about peak water? You know, the load that we are putting on our ecosystem to feed people is very heavy. And I believe that agriculture we're not limited. We're not that dumb. We can figure out how to do this right. We can figure out how to feed the world in a way that makes it a better world. And we do have to use all the tools that are at our disposal to do that.
So, the first step is admitting we have a problem in this country. And this actually came from Farm Journal. This is a conventional thing. The organic system can do things better. We can draw our circle much more inclusively. We can take credit and take responsibility for a lot more.
But it's not automatically better.
Are we perfect? No. There's an awful lot of improvement that can still happen in the organic system. But if we can take responsibility for not only our successes, but also the failures that we're still dealing with, and try to move away from that and get better, then we can continue to improve.
So the next generation, and I hope we're part of it for a while too yet, of organic, is going to deal with how do we stop using so much energy on our organic farms? How do we build organic matter on our organic farms? How do we stop the loss of minerals due to over-application of composts and manures? How do we produce food that has good food safety? all of those things are areas where we can improve too. And the organic system, you know, obviously we have an NOP rule which defines it, but I certainly hope that it never stops evolving and never stops trying to get better.
Or as we as farmers never aren't content with just being good enough to meet the standards, but we want to be better than that. We need to be better farmers than that.
And we need to be honest when we see things that we could be doing better and not just assume because we're organic now, we're okay.
So the first question, and we're going to run through a series of questions, is how do we create a stable organic farming system? Too often we think about practices, we think about things we do on the farm, but we don't necessarily look at the whole package as a system. So how do we first define and develop a system from all the different pieces and the different practices that we're using?
The practices are definitely important, but we tend to get a lot of questions, and this is something that's really come home to me with people calling. The first pet peeve, and this is a little bit off topic, but I get a lot of calls from farmers who want me to tell them how to continue doing exactly the same thing they've been doing every year and get a totally different result. And those conversations never go well.
So here's an example of a system. This is your baby. A system situation that uses practices in a perhaps different and a perhaps wiser means.
So organic no-till was developed in the form that most of us know about, was developed by our friend Jeff Moyer. And I think this is a really great, promising practice, but just plugging it into a system that it doesn't work well with is not going to take us anywhere. We have to create a system that includes excellent practices like this as part of it. I get a lot of questions from people saying, I want to know how to grow organic wheat, or I want to know how to grow organic corn. I can't help someone with that question. The right question is, how do you create a system on your farm with the resources, climate, and everything else that you have that includes this crop, and what other crops does it need to include? So with this organic no-till practice, and we're working very closely with some people at Cornell right now on it, we have to figure out how does it fit. If we can't plant the rye at the right time, if the previous crop is not off the field at the right time to plant the rye so that it's going to suppress the weeds and create an environment for the next crop to grow correctly, it's going to be a good practice out of place, and people are going to call it a failure. If we decide to grow corn and we haven't in the system upstream had enough nitrogen fixed by a legume crop that's going to leave it for the corn crop, it's not going to work. The default setting will be to figure out where do I find enough nitrogen in manure, or where do I find enough off-farm inputs. That's farming conventionally with organic inputs. The system has to work seamlessly, and when it does, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. It's amazing how a well-balanced system, how productive it is, and how well it works.
The next question we usually often get is, what is your crop rotation so that we can use it on our farm? And that is also the wrong question, because what works on our farm works uniquely with our whole system. The bigger thing to do is to ask first, what crops are going to be best adapted, what crops are going to fit the markets best, which crops are going to fit my available resources as far as equipment and labor and time, and what crops are going to be best adapted to enhancing the environmental conditions of my farm. You know, those are 4 different questions that are unique to your farm that aren't necessarily going to have the same answers that are unique to our farm. So developing a system isn't something that you can take a template from our farm and put it over onto your farm, or the vegetable farmer up the road onto your farm. You've got to develop a system that works for your situation, which isn't just agronomic. There's a lot of economic, a lot of labor, a lot of other issues involved that are involved in developing a system.
And these systems can't be static. One common denominator with most systems is the more complexity and the more diversity we build into the system, the better it works. What we have found as our system has evolved was that every time we had an agronomic problem, the best solution has been to add some kind of diversity. We've got lots of examples. We've talked about them at different meetings. But every agronomic problem that makes us wish we had a way to kill this problem, if we step back and looked at it a little farther, if we added one more crop, or if we double crop something, if we changed the cover crop, if we did something somewhere along the lines that added to the biological diversity in the entire system, it usually would take away the conditions that cause the problem.
Rodale Institute put together a systems trial that ran for about 25 years.
Still running.
Still running with a little bit less funding, a little less effort, but it's still running because a system is not something that is a one-year thing. It's something that evolves over time, that changes over time. And what we found worked very well on our farm in the first 5 years of being organic. We kind of hit a wall on some of them because the same practice doesn't necessarily work the same way for a long time.
They say you never swim in the same river twice. Well, you never plant in the same soil twice because everything we do changes that soil.
We've also been part of a systems trial at Cornell, and they have more or less replicated what we've done on our farm. But they are in their second round of,
or
third round of decision making and changing. And what we're all learning is a system, it evolves over time. It is not static. It's something that we have to keep an eye on constantly and keep adapting to the situations.
Yeah, I'd like to make an appeal here. The Cornell systems trial is running out of money. The Rodale systems trial is running out of money. It's really appealing for funding organizations, even our government, to fund short-term research with very short-term results and a narrow focus. But how much more valuable are the results from these long-term systems? You can't step into a farm or a field that has been 10 years with very close records, like the Cornell system or the Rodale system, which is, I think, over 30 years now. The data you can get, the biology that you're working with, and what you can learn from it is irreplaceable. And if that system fails for lack of funding, how long will it take us to get back where we were? And I really want to appeal to our lawmakers, our educators, anyone from Cornell here. Let's find a way to keep these systems running because the best results are just ahead of us on them. I'm going to give an example of that. There was a long-term system called Sanborn Field at University of Missouri. I think it ran for 75 years. There's a plaque there. It said, this is where Oreomycin was discovered. It was something like 70 years into that system, Dr. Albrecht saw something that looked unusual in plot 22. It was a fungus. And he took it out and he sent it to a microbiologist friend and he said, this is important, I think you need to study it. And that was where we got that antibiotic from. Now, if that system had been run out of funding at 10 or 15 years, how much would that have cost this humanity in this country?
We often don't take credit enough for what we do on our farms that is good. These are a couple of examples. A cover crop of clover will produce up to 200 bushel per acre will be enough nitrogen to produce up to 200 bushel per acre of corn the following year. There's a lot of nitrogen in that clover cover crop. We don't have to go out and buy that. Years ago, I took this picture for our certifier at the time who wanted to make sure that we were incorporating biomass. This was part of the certification process. And so I just took the picture, just went out there and snapped it real fast so that we could document this. I've used this in a lot of talks because this also indicates something else. You see that soil? Nice, loose, dark soil, looks sort of like chocolate cake. Well, that soil is active. That soil is full of creatures. We have a friend up in Canada who is a pasture management person, and she feels that no farm is complete without animals. And we tell her, yes, we agree with you, but our animals are really small. But we feed them, we tend them, we give them good stuff to eat, just as if they were larger. And it's very important for us to realize as farmers that the very small livestock you have on your farm is just as important to tend. They don't just happen. If we want a soil that is healthy, that has good diversity in it, that has good resistance to pathogens, that is cycling nutrients and holding nutrients in place so that they don't run off or erode away, we have to take care of it as if it was a living organism in itself. We have to feed it. We have to give it good food.
Now, those earthworms really like to reproduce. I've seen hands full of dirt with 20 earthworms in them. And I've had a lot of fun at farmer meetings, conventional meetings and organic both, because I'll ask at the conventional meetings, what kills the earthworms? Why do we have so few earthworms on a lot of farms? And it's all the tillage, it's all the plowing. And then I go to some organic meetings, not this one, and say, what do you think is killing the earthworms? Why don't we have earthworms? Oh, it's because of all the chemicals. I believe we're starving them to death. When we have farming systems where there's nothing but dead crop residue going back, think about how strong would our kids be and how big would our families be if we fed them dead crop residue as opposed to something that's high in protein, high in sugar, high in vitamins. Would we expect earthworms to thrive if we're giving them lousy food? So that the numbers on that picture that shows a little bit how the system changes. We showed 160 pounds of N, 10 pounds of P2O5. Recently did that, and I didn't set this up for the talk, but it's interesting that just 2 days ago, I was with a group of neighbors, and we pulled out a forage test, and we're now harvesting that clover, and we're feeding it to dairy cattle on a neighbor's farm. And incidentally, I wouldn't talk to him about doing it until he agreed that we get the manure back. But at that meeting, we sat down and calculated from a forage analysis how many minerals did we pull off when we sent that. And the numbers now, instead of being 210, and I think it's 60, the numbers in our farm from the field last year were 390, 40, and 160. This is because the land is getting richer. The system is becoming stronger, and we're cycling more and more minerals. That's a massive amount of fertility. He understood after we calculated that why I couldn't let him keep it. There is this saying, and I heard it in Vermont once, that you can buy the neighbor's farm one bale at a time by importing the fertility that way. So last year, we were invited to a meeting to discuss feeding the world in 35 years. And I was set at a table across from, who's now a friend, Bill Buckner, who was chair of Bayer Crop Science. And we were supposed to discuss the role of technology in feeding the world in the future. And I think he thought, what am I going to have in common with this organic farmer? He probably still got worms crawling on his. And I was thinking, what am I going to find in common with this purveyor of poison? And after we sat down and started talking, we discovered that we liked each other and that we actually had something in common. And what we agreed on was that there is a lot of common ground if we focus on our commonalities and our agreements instead of on our differences. And both Bill and I agreed that the most important thing in feeding the world in the future is soil health. The future capacity of our soil to produce food is the thing we need to preserve most of all. And out of that meeting came another meeting in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and since then Bill stopped working for Bayer Crop Science, and he's now the director of the Noble Institute, which was another story in itself, but he and I selected 25 people from all areas of agriculture. Somehow organic farmers in Cornell University were a little more heavily represented than in proportion maybe, but there were also people from Monsanto and from Walmart. DuPont was invited, but they decided that it was suspicious. We had NRCS, we had ARS, and we had people who sold chemicals and sold fertilizers. And this whole group, our challenge was to sit down and find out where is the common ground. And at that meeting was one of our own. Years ago we met Bianca. She was here as a student attending this conference when it was much smaller. And she talked about the Cornell soil health test. And totally unscripted, everybody in the room said, why don't you give us a presentation on how you test for soil health? make a long story short, she's now a division chief. She went from having a part-time soft money position at Cornell within a year to be asked to be a division chief at NRCS. Dr. Honeycutt recognized talent and put it there, but the Cornell soil health test is central to what NRCS is doing. But from that meeting, there were several facts came out that I think were really important. And one is every pound of corn we were growing in the Corn Belt was losing a pound of soil. Now that's not sustainable farming. That's mining a non-renewable resource. And also that we were using phosphorus at this enormous rate, and the Noble Institute is putting a lot of resources into studying how do we recycle phosphorus, how do we deal with this shortage that's coming. And we went right down the list. And every one of these factors came back to the answer is we need to improve the health of our soil.
On May 15th this past year in Penn Yan, we had a tremendous amount of rain that filled up 3 streams and created a great deal of flooding. It did a lot of damage to downtown Penn Yan. But the following day, I drove up and looked out over Keuka Lake, and you could see these streams of mud racing down into Keuka Lake. The next week in the newspaper, we saw pictures of one of our neighbors' farms. He farms up on the hill, and that's people standing down in the bottom of the chasms cut down through his farm.
Tom is taller than I am. That's who's standing in the hole.
A lot of soil was lost that night. Our son also farms next to Jeff Dan, that field, and he lost virtually nothing. Now, Jeff is a corn, soybean, no-till farmer.
And a good farmer.
And a good farmer. Our son is an organic farmer. He was farming in strips. He was farming with much more organic matter in the soil, a lot less soil loss. So if we need a reminder of what we're after, if we need a reminder of how fast things can be lost through one freak storm that just filled up streams so fast, maybe this is one. We need to do something different. The replacement on that soil is going to take centuries.
It'd probably take more than many centuries.
Many centuries.
And we talked about, and I really appreciate risk management agency people were here. We talked about setting up products that were going to be useful for organic farmers. But we could take this as a risk that needs to be indemnified, or we could take it as a preventable event that was very regretful.
Yes.
And that all depends on where we are in our understanding of how to manage soil.
A few more questions. How do we're good farmers. We've just all of a sudden, we've now solved all of our soil health problems and our systems problems. We still have other things to farm. We have each other to farm. How do we create healthy and sustainable businesses and communities? Because farming alone isn't good enough. We here need to also develop a community. Back in the mid-90s, the first organic dairy farmers came to us and said, you've got some organic grains, and we know somebody else with a blower truck. Could you start providing feed for us? And we looked at each other and said, well, sure. That's only 3 of you. We can do it. By 2001, we had over 100 customers, and we purchased the Penn Yan Agway that was being sold off as Agway went bankrupt, thinking that we might be able to run it part-time, that we could hire one person to grind feed now and then. Now we have 10 employees. We have 2 trucks on the road most of the time. And we send out our newsletter to 900 of our closest friends, some of whom are here in the room. And we're continuing to grow. 2014 was our biggest growth year yet. So we have developed this community of support. We're kind of the pivot here. It's a fun place to be. It's a lot of hard work. Those are some of my employees. Nobody's had to tell us to provide health insurance. No one's had to tell us to provide retirement or a substantially above minimum wage salary. No one's had to tell us to respect their family lives and to give them paid leave so that they can have vacation and do other things. We don't need to have the government telling us how to run our business. What we need is to treat our employees like we want to be treated. And I think that's a very important factor.
The good news is there are enough resources. The system is productive. There's abundance. And there is plenty for everybody to have enough.
Yeah, I just read recently, we shouldn't talk about getting our piece of the pie. We've got to remember that the world is a kitchen and we can all bake our own pies. This is our pie. Back in the mid-'90s, we also looked at the other farmers around us, and we decided that we needed to have a community of other farmers working together. We needed to have the support, we needed to have the markets, we needed to have the knowledge base that we could share with each other. And that's what we called New York Certified Organic, NYCO. Some of you have been active in that for a long time. It's a way for farmers to get together on a regular basis and say, I'm having problems with, and another farmer says, yes, but I have been able to do. And we've been able to share information and pool it together so that we all get better at what we're doing.
This has been a really subversive organization. Over the years, we've had a lot of conventional farmers come. And the first thing that really surprises them is that everybody here wants to share their information with me, and everybody here wants me to survive. Everyone wants me to do better and be successful on my farm. And we spent a lot of years in communities where everybody was everyone else's takeover prospect because there wasn't enough to go around. So I had to have your farm so there would be enough so that we had enough. The truth is there's plenty, and there's plenty for all of us. And this type of a community is part of what makes that plenty, that when we work together, we really do grow the whole system, and we make more assets for everyone to share.
And we have the best potluck lunches.
Yeah.
So, a few questions to finish up. This also came from the Cornell talk, and so I just kind of spun it a little bit differently for the organic community, because not all the questions that I would ask conventional farmers are inappropriate to ask organic farmers, because we all aren't necessarily doing everything right. But do we want an agricultural system that is dependent on increasing inputs, inputs that we're running out of? Do we want one that is predicated on escalating an arms race of evolution between chemistry and technology and nature? Do we want an agricultural system that is justified, that short-term gains will justify any kind of long-term downsides? And that isn't unique to just conventional agriculture. Do we want an agricultural system that externalizes environmental costs? Or do we want an agricultural system that is significantly better, both agronomic and social, economic and justice? Do we want something that is significantly different, that uses sustainable and resilient food and feed and makes for a better system all around? I think we need to redefine our lens of what is success. We need to ask ourselves what we want the future to look like in 50 years, what we want agriculture to look like in 50 years. Long after many of us are going to be gone, what do we want our agricultural system to look like? And can we do something now to make that happen? The proof of the pudding is what we've achieved. The proof of the pudding is we've never used neonicotinoid insecticides on our farm. We've got bees. It's a good thing. We've never used any GMOs on our farm. We haven't used pesticides on our farm for 20 years. We've never used antibiotics on our animals. They're alive, you know?
It works, but it doesn't work by itself. You know, we have to manage all of these systems to provide health. And it's interesting to me, soil health has been a passion, but it's sad that we don't think of soil health except in the absence of it usually. Just like we don't think of our own health except in terms of sickness. You know, if we want a truly healthy system, a vibrant one, we need to go beyond just thinking of the absence of sickness and see how do we make this stronger? How do we make everything work better?
So what we need to achieve, what we need to commit to, is to use for our lens of success. And that's a lot of words up there. I can have them at our table if you want to read them. They're fairly carefully thought through, but they might be hard to read. But what we need to commit for our lens of success is not to just be content with a less bad system, but to truly come up with something, truly imagine a system that is significantly better on all counts. A less bad system isn't adequate for us organic farmers. Something better is possible. Because, folks, we know where the end of the rainbow is. Okay. We've got a lot of articles posted on our website, okay?